Will Joe Biden and Donald Trump face each other in the US election in November? The current and former presidents swept the polls in Super Tuesday's vote. Now they hope to get their party's nominations. But what are American voters' priorities this time round? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. A rematch between US President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump now seems almost certain. Both swept to impressive victories on Super Tuesday when primaries were held in more than a dozen states. But despite strong showings, both candidates face challenges in rallying their base. Some Republicans are unenthusiastic about another Trump run for the presidency, and Biden has opponents in his camp who oppose his support for Israel's war on Gaza. We'll go to our panel in just a moment, but first, a report from Finighan.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one.
Donald Trump has cemented his place as the Republican challenger for the U.S. presidency in November. With resounding primary victories in 12 more states, his lead is now virtually unassailable.
We're going to win this election because we have no choice. If we lose the election, we're not going to have a country left.
Exit polls suggest Trump's calls for tougher immigration policies have resonated with many Republican voters. But despite his strong showing, he's still vulnerable. Trump has been charged with nearly 100 offenses in several criminal cases that could complicate his run for the presidency. Nikki Haley, his last remaining Republican opponent, now has nearly no chance of winning. But her double-digit support in many states suggests a portion of Republican voters aren't enthusiastic about another Trump run for the White House.
Between Donald Trump and the fact with the insurrection and kind of all that happened, I felt more comfortable with voting for basically a kind of a protest ballot against him because, the party knows he'll probably win the nominations.
Oh, I'm terribly frustrated with this country. I mean, the fact that we have Biden and Trump to choose from, it's disgraceful. It's just disgraceful. We don't need two octogenarians in office, running for office. There's plenty of other people who are earlier in their careers who could run and do a better job than those two.
U.S. President Joe Biden also swept to victory in the Democratic primary races. But he too faces challenges. Biden's support for Israel and war on Gaza is opposed by some Democrat voters. He ran unopposed in many states, but some Democrats registered their disapproval by voting non-committed.
Voting non-committed means that the Democratic Party has to change. They have to take in the voters' preference on the topic of Gaza, and they've been mishandling it completely so far. So if this is the only tool I have to pressure them, that's what I'm going to do.
Super Tuesday has all but ensured another showdown between Biden and Trump in November. But while both may have their party's nomination in the bag, it's not clear whether they have the full support of their party's voters. Finighan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, we're fortunate enough to have with us a panel of experts that reflects diverse opinions across the US political spectrum. From Washington, D.C., the well-known pollster James Zogby, who's also president of the Arab American Institute. From Burlington, Vermont, Arshad Hasan is a Democratic Party political strategist and co-founder of Convey Communications, a firm that aims to support emerging progressive leaders. And also in the US Capitol, Rina Shah is a conservative political advisor and Republican opposed to Donald Trump's leadership. Welcome to you all. James, it wasn't the decisive day that it can be and has been. Has Super Tuesday ever mattered less? I mean, we knew more or less before Tuesday that it's going to be a Biden-Trump rematch in November, didn't we?
Yeah, it certainly was. And this is not the Super Tuesday I recall from the 80s when Jackson swept, or from the 90s, or any other Super Tuesday. It was expected. Turnout was very low, which I think is of concern to both candidates in both parties. And there certainly are concerns for Biden with the low turnout, the lack of enthusiasm, and for Trump on the fact that he hasn't consolidated support among all Republicans. This is going to be a fascinating election because the stakes are so high, but most voters are not pleased with the candidates who are carrying the banner on either side. It's an Armageddon election. People are going into a battle at the end of the world if the other side wins, but they're not happy with the standard bearer on their side.
Arshad, could Biden's mishandling of Israel's war on Gaza cost him the election in November?
It's a question that he does need to ask himself. He needs to figure out how to get good with his base. And it's not just because, the base doesn't have anywhere else to go. This uncommitted campaign is to put the Biden campaign on notice. In Michigan and now in Minnesota, we've got a substantial vote. Now, to note, they didn't vote for any of the other options on the ballot. They're telling Biden to get good with the base. And I think that's important. Our base is young people, people of color. We want to send a message, and this is how they've done it.
Rina, Nikki Haley's campaign is over. She denied Trump a clean sweep on Tuesday, but there was little point in her carrying on, was there? Why did she fail to connect with Republican voters? Or is the Trump juggernaut just too big and too powerful to stop?
It's a little bit more of the latter. There was a great deal of connection between Nikki Haley and I would say a healthy swath of today's Republican Party. If anything, we learned from Super Tuesday was that basically the Republican Party is not as unified as the former President Trump goes out there saying almost daily. He and his team understand that they have a bit of an uphill battle ahead of them. They won't, of course, make this concession in public. His victory speech last night sounded very much like the Trump we've always known, the one who had that 4-year term in the White House and who he's been as a private citizen in the years since he was denied a second term. What we know now, though, is that 30 to 40% of Republican voters in primaries did reject Trump. And that is, again, a real problem for Trump. So they're going to have to solve for that as they move forward. Nikki Haley basically did not pick up the delegate math in order to close the gap between her and Trump. Her goal on Super Tuesday was purely just to be competitive. And so to shutter her campaign certainly is not a surprise, but the moment really demands the Republican Party look inward and figure out how it's going to move forward with a nominee that is deeply unpopular and who has some serious warning signs glaring him in the face. He has weaknesses in more moderate and affluent areas like the Northern Virginia suburbs, for example. This is not an easy a challenge that he will solve overnight. I'm not even sure that he will solve it before November, because what we'll see in the general election will be that real weakness again rear its head for Trump and or whoever the Republican nominee is. I actually tend to believe that there may be a brokered convention this summer.
James, do you agree with that? Were there warning signs for Trump in last night's polling numbers? Nikki Haley was able to make gains against Trump in areas dominated by white voters with college degrees. Is there a class divide among GOP voters? Could that hinder Trump in November?
I keep hearing that. But the same polls that show state by state 30, 40% voting against Trump show nationally Trump beating Biden by 5-6 points. There is a consolidation when given the choice Trump versus. And I think that I recall back 2016, there also was talk of a brokered convention. The party establishment has never wanted Donald Trump, but he's found a way to incite enough voters. And I mean incite. I mean, his message is frighteningly reminiscent of All the King's Men and the kind of almost proto-fascist leadership that has found people with desperate need, social dislocation, political dislocation, a sense of all is lost and I'm going to save you. And that has grabbed so many people so hard that his situation is, I think, very difficult to turn around. I don't think that Republicans can dislodge Donald Trump without totally destroying their party, which is already destroyed. It's the Donald Trump party. So I think, yeah, that there's talk. I know that there are a lot of Republicans who would like to see the Republican Party of old. It doesn't exist anymore. It's the Donald Trump party. And that's what we're going to have in November is the Donald Trump party versus the Joe Biden party. And people aren't going to be happy with it, but that's the choice we've got. And it's, I think, more to the point here of what we learned, the Minnesota vote, the North Carolina vote, the uncommitted and the no preference was much higher than anyone expected. I think Joe Biden has a problem closing the deal with his base. And it's not that they'll vote against him at all. It's that they probably won't vote at all. And you cannot win as a Democrat unless you consolidate a much higher percentage of the Black vote, Latino vote, Asian vote, and youth vote than Joe Biden's been able to do. As I said, this is an election. The stakes are really high, but the turnout will be suppressed because Democrats and Republicans and independents aren't happy with the choices that they've got.
I want to come back to the uncommitted in just a few minutes, but Arshad, do you want to pick up on what James was saying there, particularly how Donald Trump has managed to appeal to so many blue-collar workers in the United States who would traditionally have voted Democrat?
Well, let me correct that real quick. When we talk about blue collar, if we're talking about lower income folks, people who are working in wage jobs, he only picks up white blue collar workers. He does not pick up blue collar workers of color, and that's not a difference without a distinction here. When it comes to incomes under $50,000, Donald Trump doesn't have the lock on any of that. And this is where Joe Biden does need to do some work here. That base of people who may be voting uncommitted, that base of people who are progressive and have progressive economic ideas, these are people that Joe Biden can pick up if he inspires the Democratic base, which is to say young people, people of color. And these uncommitted votes, these are warning signs that he needs to come back to the base. And again, I don't mean some kind of left-wing politics. The Gaza ceasefire among the Democratic Party and among the country is more popular than it is in, for example, in Congress. So these are popular ideas that Joe Biden can come back to. Now in November, this is fixable, and this is a message to Joe Biden to come back and fix this.
Rina, do you agree with what James was saying there about the Republican Party no longer being the Republican Party, it's the Trump Party? How do you explain the hold that Trump has over the party and its voters, most of its voters?
We don't exactly have to split hairs here to understand what's at play. And it's that we have an incumbent right now, President Biden, who has some really high unfavorables. For example, I myself was a crossover voter in 2020, having voted for the first time for a Democrat for president. And I crossed over again. I was a lifelong Republican. I voted for Biden. I did not expect that he would run for another term. And I'm deeply frustrated by that. And I think it's a bad move for him. I wish he had actually decided not to run for re-election and gone ahead and tapped somebody else. So what we're seeing right now is a lot of the electorate feeling like, how are we seeing a Biden-Trump rematch? And that's an entryway for Trump. Every time that Biden is out there in the public eye being scrutinized for his lack of cognitive ability, again, something that has been hotly debated. And then also, what you're really seeing in Gen Z is a frustration, again, not by this president, not to pass the baton. It was Gen Z who put Biden and Harris in the White House. So yes, we're inevitably careening towards a Biden-Trump rematch, the rematch that nobody wants. And I do believe that turnout will be suppressed. But you have to look at the numbers from last night, again, to see that this Republican Party is not what it was 8 years ago. 2016 was a different scenario. 2020 was a different scenario. And now we're in a completely, in an atypical scenario. We just have nothing in modern history to look at. And I think I'm most struck by the result from Vermont last night, where Nikki Haley won by about 4 points. There were a couple polls that had Trump up by 30 and I believe 28 points. To be that wrong on the numbers, I would just caution folks, if we learned nothing from 2016, please just do not believe all the polls out there. This is problematic for Trump when you look at numbers across Arkansas, Massachusetts, Virginia. You see he was underperforming in many places. So this is, yes, Trump's party, but there are huge problems here. And so while it may not be the party of yesteryear, it's a brand new party that comes with a new set of problems. And one of the biggest ones is how to get the independently minded voters in swing states, how to get suburban college-educated women under the tent of republicanism in 2024.
James, would you agree with that? I mean, are the polls not to be believed?
No, it's part of what I do, and I think my brother very clearly would also disagree. He does the domestic polling. I do the Middle East polling. Look, the polls are showing both candidates have problems, to be sure. The polls are also showing that Donald Trump is leading in nationwide polling. Now, Vermont, look, I think, let's be clear here. Nikki Haley wins Vermont and Nikki Haley wins DC. Guess what? They don't matter. They're both totally blue states, and they're always going to be blue states in the foreseeable future. It's the Bernie Sanders state. It's the 96% Democrat state in Washington, D.C. Nikki Haley wins them because they never would vote for Trump anyway. The real point is that if you look at the national polling and you look at the series of national polling that's gone on now for months now, across the board, Donald Trump has consolidated support among the Republican Party. Not just consolidated support, but he's also consolidated a view of these are the Republicans who still think Barack Obama was a Muslim. These are the Republicans who still think Barack Obama wasn't born here. These are the Republicans who in 70, 80% believe that Joe Biden is not a legitimate president. This is a problem in the Republican Party, and Donald Trump has caught hold of this mindset and defined it, and defined himself as the savior of those who are in need. And they're buying it. And I think, look, I remember the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan, the Republican Party of a Mitt Romney, the Republican Party of Gerald Ford. That doesn't exist anymore. It is now the Republican Party of Newt Gingrich and Donald Trump. It's the Republican Party of aggressive, partisan, hate-filled politics and preaching to a desperate public that is looking for someone to save them because they don't know what's happening. They don't understand the changes that are taking place all around them. That's a problem. And Donald Trump will consolidate that vote as he did in 2016. Will he beat Joe Biden? I think let's go back to the Biden side of the ledger. He has some issues that he has to deal with. I think age is certainly one of them. But Gaza has become a significant issue, not just because Democratic voters and Americans want a ceasefire, they want the killing to end, but it's come to represent something far deeper, far more serious. And that is the fact that America is out of touch with human suffering in the world. It's out of touch with a value-based foreign policy. The values that they want are not the values of let's go beat them and kill them all and line them up as Winston Churchill would have led back a half century or more ago. It's a values that says we should not be seeing genocide unfolding. It's a values that say we should not be seeing people mowed down in the streets. It's a value that says we should not see starving children and do nothing about it. And people are frustrated about that. And so they're voting uncommitted. And I think they'll continue to do that until Joe Biden acts decisively to change this around. They don't want a war. They don't want to continue, and they don't want to be complicit in it. And I think that the Democrats still haven't caught that.
So very briefly, after those uncommitted votes that we saw both in Michigan and then again on Tuesday, Biden is yet to read the room.
I think he hasn't read the room. I wrote an article about that, and I think he clearly hasn't. And I think Nikki Haley, the Vice President Kamala Harris was sent out to deliver a message like that I'm feeling it, I'm seeing it, but was a message that resonated with people, but it didn't translate to a policy change. They're still not calling for a permanent ceasefire. They're still not calling for an end to complicity in terms of weapons supplies. They're not limiting. Look, Ronald Reagan, I'm a Democrat. I never thought I would suggest that a Democrat do what Ronald Reagan did. But in 1982, he told Begin, stop. He said, this looks like a Holocaust and people are seeing it. He suspended cluster bombs. He suspended F-16s and Begin stopped. Joe Biden has to do at least that much.
Arshad, how does the president then navigate this growing abandon Biden campaign stemming from his hesitancy to call for a ceasefire in Israel's war on Gaza, and to what extent to voters, particularly younger and Arab Americans, feel that Biden has betrayed them?
I do want to respond real quick to both James and Rina talking about my home state, Vermont, where I vote. I was not surprised that Nikki Haley got such a huge portion of our vote. Vermont isn't the Bernie Sanders state that you think it is. We have a Republican governor We've reelected numerous times. He's actually one of the most popular governors in the state. There is, maybe not, there's not a whole lot, there are opportunities for Republicans to get votes out of even places like Vermont. We're full of crossover voters. The Republican Party, though, has chosen not to. When you take a look at states like North Carolina and Virginia, then Nikki Haley voters who came out, according to exit polling, 2/3 of them in both states, and these are swing states, said that they wouldn't vote for Donald Trump if he was a nominee. James is right, and Rina too, about this idea that Republicans have chosen to go in a direction that closes them off, that actually narrows their prospects. There are voters to win in North Carolina and Virginia, and yes, even in Vermont, if Republicans can abandon this racist, xenophobic base that they've doubled down to and that they've incited. So on that side, this is a problem for Trump. You can't win with an increasingly small base like that. That's an opportunity, of course, for Joe Biden. For Joe Biden, as I mentioned before, the ball is in his court. There are solutions. I think that Kamala Harris's comment is a start, that not just a comment, the declaration that we are also asking for a ceasefire. I think that should be just the beginning. To be able to consolidate the base.
When the stakes are so high, what's taking him so long?
The stakes are so high on so many domestic issues as well in the United States. Abortion, gay rights, the progress that we have made in the last great many years is under threat from the Supreme Court, from Republicans in Congress. Right now, Joe Biden, in terms of keeping his base, is relying on a number of other domestic issues, as well as economic issues, to keep the base in line. This growing uncommitted vote, I think, takes a lot of establishment Democrats by surprise. And these votes, these campaigns, are really doing, I believe, a good job sending a message, maybe even unnerving the Biden campaign to say, hold on a second, you can't just take the base for granted just because there's other issues like abortion, gay rights, et cetera. We have to come back to this issue. And this isn't a bad issue for him to come back to. Most of Americans also support a ceasefire.
Rina, do you want to come back on that? And also, I want to put a question to you about the age of both candidates here. The president, 81? Donald Trump, 77. You can see why younger voters aren't particularly enthused about the choice in the election. If they stayed away in November, who would have most to lose, Trump or Biden?
This isn't about ageism, and I frequently hear that it's ageist to criticize the ages of both these candidates, and I just think that's absolute malarkey. When you look at the retirement age being anywhere between 61 and 67 in states coast to coast, you wonder what these two guys are doing, running to be the top leader of our land. Are they even in touch with what regular everyday Americans are facing? Both of them are grandfathers. They have grandchildren whose futures depend on leaders who understand the biggest issues of the day, which are things like cybersecurity. Look at the southern border. Did Trump, he didn't even finish the wall, forget that. He goes out on the trail lying about that daily, saying that he fixed the crisis when he was in office. The wall was never finished, but he never even deployed sophisticated, innovative techniques that would have helped keep our border secure. So we see a crisis. And I think the real frustration for me right now is the fact that we have a system that rewards incumbents sitting in Congress, as well as makes this presidential primary system so very unfair. And coming from a more conservative, right-leaning political ideology, I don't believe in certain tactics to level the playing field. For example, I'm not a quotas type of person, but what I see when I look around the America I'm in today, raising very young children in, is an inability for me and my generation of millennials to be able to get the dream that my parents had, which was to change homes every 5 to 8 years, have a 2-car garage, 2-story house with a white picket fence, a safe community in which the schools are exceptional. These are the issues that are on the kitchen table, and Nikki Haley took them, and she even had a lot of heads turning of liberal women who were looking at her with a fresh set of eyes, saying, hey, some of the stuff she's saying is palatable. So what I'm looking and seeing right now is a system that, again, is sort of rigged, and I'm not trying trying to say it's rigged a la Trump, but in a way it is. Look at the state parties. The Republican parties are remade in his image. His loyalists have crept into the infrastructure and created caucus systems which benefit him. So until people wake up and decide to say, we want an overturn of Citizens United to get big money out of our politics, we want term limits, we want to end gerrymandering, these are things that I have talked to younger Republicans about, and they find palatable. So the tide is turning. There is a seismic shift, but it seems like some of these leaders do not want to pass the baton or leave their secure, safe, profitable seats of power in order to make room for the next generation. And it is very, very frustrating. That's why yesterday shows us just how apathetic the electorate is.
James, if the election were tomorrow, Trump would win. What could change between now and November to prevent that?
Well, a couple things. Number one, I think I'd agree with Rina that we're not sure till this moment. We're not sure who the candidates will be in November. I'm not going to place any bets on that. It looks like Trump and Biden. I think if it were Trump and Biden, it'd be a very close contest, and it would be down to a couple of states that are absolutely critical. Michigan being one of them, Pennsylvania being another, Florida and Georgia being others. The question is, will Joe Biden do what he needs to do? If he is, in fact, running against Donald Trump, will he do what he needs to do to get the uncommitteds, those who are disaffected right now from the Democratic ticket, to come back home? He has the unique capacity as a Democrat to move to get the traditional Democratic base, that is working class ethnic voters from Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, states like that, back into the Democratic fold. He is working class Joe from Scranton. That's the persona, and that has been attractive to people. He did capture that vote in 2020. He could do it again. But this is a situation where I think we don't know. We don't know who the nominees are going to be, actually, because there is an age issue, to be sure. There also is, Donald Trump's a little wacky, and something could happen between now and then. I don't know. I don't think either party is in a position, both structurally and in terms of the political process, to come up with a way of replacing the nominees. It'll be a voice vote from the floor of a convening of the RNC or the DNC, and it'll end up being reminiscent more of the Bulgarian Communist Party 1955, where everybody's told before they go in who they're voting for. So that could happen. I just don't know. But if it were today between Biden and Trump, it'd be very close. It would depend on a couple of key states. It would depend upon the extent to which Joe Biden read the room and was able to bring back disaffected voters. A lot of them disaffected because of Gaza, which is, I think, really of consequence for those of us from the Arab community. And I think it's going to be something we're going to be holding our breath until we get to November to see what comes out.
And I know that both Arshad and Rina wanted to come back in there, but I'm sorry, we're out of time. Many thanks indeed to all of you for taking part in today's program. James Zogby, Arshad Hasan, and Rina Shah. Thank you for watching. You can see the program again at any time by going to the website. aljazeera.com is where you'll find it. For further discussion, you can join us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X, our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here, we'll see you again. Bye for now.